Hey everybody, this is my 125 gallon New World tank, and we're not looking at it for any particular reason. I just want to go over a quick tip. I've mentioned this in the past, but I forget that I always get new viewers, and just because I shot a video about something years ago doesn't mean that it's not worth bringing up and mentioning again. So the other day I had a viewer talk about some of the size rocks that I have in my other 125 gallon tank, the one I simply call my 125. And they were concerned that some of the digging fish in there might shift the rocks around, and then those rocks might actually put undue pressure on the bottom glass of the tank and could actually break the glass or something to that effect. And as I told them, and as I'm going to tell you now, I always make sure I use a buffer in between the rocks and the glass. And what I do is I buy what is usually referred to as egg crate plastic, but what it actually is the light diffuser for a standard overhead fluorescent fixture. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any place like that that sells the lighting, and you will buy sheets of plastic that look like this, except much larger. This is just a little chunk I've got left over. I figured I would grab for the sake of example. And what I do is I lay this in the tank before I even put in my gravel substrate. And in this tank, if you look in the back corner where the fish has moved a lot of the gravel out of the way, you can indeed see that sort of grid work on the bottom. So what I do is I lay that in the bottom of the tank, and then all of the rocks get placed on that so that none of the rocks are ever coming in direct contact with the glass. And that way it spreads out that weight, it prevents any pressure points from happening, it prevents the rocks from scratching the glass. A lot of times rocks will contain silicates and stuff that are actually hard enough to scratch the glass. And of course, when you bring pressure to a point, even if it's not a huge rock, if it's got a sharp point and it falls a little bit and that tiny point hits that glass, you can actually shatter aquarium glass with a fairly small rock depending on how it hits. And so I always make sure that I keep something in between the rocks and the bottom of the fish tank. And the other thing I do that I think is important in the process is I put it in there and then I establish all of my larger rocks. In fact, these here you can see are all sort of stacked up and leaning against each other. You can kind of see that through all that glare. Sorry about all this. But I establish all of that in a dry, empty aquarium with no gravel or substrate or anything else. And the reason I do that is so that I know that those rocks are in there stable as is. There's no buoyancy from the water helping to hold them up. And I know you may laugh at the idea of buoyancy with the rock, but buoyancy is simply the offset of the amount of water it's being displaced. So even though those rocks don't float, they do have a certain level of buoyancy. There is a little bit of that weight being reduced by the water pressure, and that can cause rocks to shift or move or whatever. So when you're doing a water change, suddenly when the water drops below a certain level, all your rocks shift and fall over, and that's because of that buoyancy. That will have an effect on your rocks. So I stack all that stuff up in an empty aquarium with no gravel, no nothing. That way the buoyancy doesn't have an impact on it, and if I've got a fish in there that's digging around or burrowing or whatever, they can move all the rocks around they want. As far as the substrate goes, all that gravel, they can move that around as much as they want. That is not conditional to how those rocks are positioned. Those rocks are positioned on that plastic lining, and then the gravel and everything is put in afterwards. So those rocks are stable. They're not going anywhere. You can drain this tank and remove all of that gravel, and those rocks will be sitting in exactly the same position they're sitting in now. So again, for a few dollars, and literally I think you're talking about $6 or $8, you get one of these. And again, it comes in the size, it's basically one of those things, except it would look like that if it was in there, So light diffuser, egg crate plastic, whatever you want to call it, it always helps to have something in between all of your big rocks and the bottom of your aquarium glass. So there you go. There's a quick tip for today. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. You never know what you're going to get with me. And don't forget, of course, this one here is my 125 gallon New World tank. So thanks again, and I will see you real soon in the next one.